Get this thing going. And it says we are live. So, all right. All right, so here we go. So let's give a few seconds of silence here and I'll start us off. Hello and welcome to The Long View, a podcast that takes a closer look at the games people play. My name is Jeff Gamble. I'm the host of The Long View. And tonight I'm very pleased to be joined by Brent Selmans, who was nice enough to reach out to me to talk about a game that we have actually already covered on the show, which is the game Through the Ages. However, since we originally talked about it way back when, those of you who listened to that first episode, a new edition has come out and a new expansion has come out. And so Brent was nice enough to reach out and say, hey, I think there's been a lot of really positive changes and things that have happened with the game, and I would love to revisit it. So I figured if he was going to be willing to tackle such a beast of a game, it would be rude of me to say no. And there has indeed been a lot of changes, I think, made and some balancing things. And it's one of the games that I've always really enjoyed, so I was happy to accept. So, Brent, I want to say hello, and thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Not a problem at all. It's a pleasure to have you, a pleasure to meet you. And did you like the way we kind of did a time shift there? So first it was tonight, and then now it's today. See, this keeps people guessing as to when we're actually recording this.
It's all part of the mystery of broadcasting.
It is. It's all part of the mystery of the old man. So anyway, I kind of caught myself as I said that. I'm like, why did I say tonight? It's not tonight. It's today. But I guess it is tonight somewhere, so I was not a liar. But
for our friends in Europe,
there we go. So Brent, this is a game that I have kind of a long history with. This originally came out in I think it was 2006, and it's designed by Vlaada Chvátil. If no one is familiar with it, although I'm assuming most people are, because it's been occupying a upper rung of the Board Game Geeks listings for quite some time. It has been an enormously popular game. It still has, the original version still has a rating of 8.0, which is no mean feat. And the game was really, for me, it was fascinating because it was a civilization game played without a map, which was kind of a mind-blowing concept at the time. Every other Civilization game that I had ever played, including Civilization and Advanced Civilization, the map was an integral kind of component of the game. Spatial relationships and whatnot were key. And so thinking about trying to play a Civilization game entirely with cards and sort of abstracted was a really fascinating concept to me. And so I did a little bit of digging into the game and discovered that while the world that we're kind of living in is highly abstracted from the point of view of like where you are, since we don't have a map, you are in the nitty-gritty minutia of running your little civilization here, down to your food supplies and your resources, which is basically your iron, is kind of the way they put it initially. And you are kind of micromanaging this civilization as it grows and expands. And so in one sense, I felt the game was really abstract. And in the other sense, I thought it was really immersive and very sort of hands-on. And it really was kind of a fascinating thing for me as I'm reading about it, right? So then I went and said, okay, I want to get a copy of this game. But I didn't have the money for it. It was when I was brand new into the hobby. And this game actually was the first trade I ever made on BGG. And I traded with a gentleman in Canada. I still remember. And we kind of came up with a set of games to swap. I think mine involved, was either one of the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective long before there was a reprint of those. Or it might have actually, it could have also been Gumshoe, which was another one of those sort of paragraph-based detective games that was put out in that same style. And he was willing to trade me Through the Ages, but not until he determined that I was a real person. So like, he was, I had to verify like my employment. He had to look me up as I'm like kind of talking with him. He's like on the website and looking, well, I see you're a teacher for the East Stroudsburg School District. I see, the board approved you. And I'm like, wow, this guy's really making sure that I'm on the up and up here. And I remember thinking it was like, is every trade on BGG going to be like this? It kind of freaked me out. But, I had no ratings. I was brand new. In retrospect, I'm grateful that he was willing to trade a game like that with me because it was really hard to find initially. People who wanted it snatched it up, and you are not going to find a copy of it. So, I guess I can, in retrospect, understand his reluctance to just kind of throw it in the mail and trust that some new dude was actually going to follow through with his end of the bargain. But when I got that game, I was just overjoyed. I actually had to have it delivered to my business address. I had to have it delivered to the school so that, we made sure that I was who I said I was. But it was amazing. And so I got it. I opened it. I started flipping through the cards, and I kind of instantly fell in love. So that's kind of my backstory with the game. And I always like to start with that, Brent, so that people know kind of where I was coming from with it. What's your story with the game?
Yeah, I came into it much later. My entry point into Through the Ages is through News Story. I've never actually played the original edition, even though I've played News Story hundreds and hundreds of times. A friend of mine came over, one of my gaming friends when I was living in Portland, came over, brought it over, broke it out. We played the intro game. I said, okay, this is interesting. And it stuck with me. There's something about the game, even though we only played the intro game, which is, the sort of that Vlad Shavato walkthrough that he has in a lot of his games. It didn't. So you play through the first 2 ages, and then you stop and sort of point salad things up based on what your civilization looks like. It really stuck with me, and there was something about it that I couldn't quite put my finger on at the time. But then I started playing it a little bit more. But as you know, it's not the easiest game to get to the table. It's a game with a reputation for being very long. And it wasn't until about the fall of 2017 when CGE released the digital version, the app, that things really blew up and opened up for me. I still play the physical version quite a bit. And I don't want to get into the weeds about the app versus the physical, but it's an important discussion point because it really blew up the community in a way for this game in a way that it hadn't opened up quite to that point. And then I just really threw myself at the game. And the way I tell people is like, there's Through the Ages. When they say, what are your favorite games? So there's Through the Ages, and then there's everything else. Like I don't even compare anything else to Through the Ages. It's like it's on another plane when we're discussing the games that everybody loves. But in terms of the gameplay itself, it has this bottomless replayability. You mentioned they just released an expansion, and I like the expansion. And I'm sure we can talk about. I'm sure we'll get to that in a bit. But it didn't even need one. It's a game that has been played by people since 2006 continuously to the point of like near exhaustion, and it still gets played all the time. And there's so many reasons why that I love about it, but really it's the variance, the variability, the strategic differences, the fact that it's tactics meets strategy. It's not a totally tactical game, but it's not a totally strategic game. It is a Civ game at the micro, like you mentioned, like micromanaging your Civ, which I just find, you almost need like a degree in accountancy in some cases, really dig into the minutia of it. Yep. I do not have, but it's something that I can't wait to play again. Every time I get done with the game, like I can't wait till I get another chance to play this.
Well, thanks for sharing that backstory with me. It is a very compelling game. I don't think there's anybody that can debate that. It's a game that really kind of grabs your attention, and it also has some really innovative ideas. I don't know that this was necessarily the first game of this kind that I saw as far as the mechanism being used, but Through the Ages uses cards for pretty much everything. And there is a display of cards that is going to kind of unfold conveyor belt style in front of the players. And the cards have a cost to them The cards that are near the end of the line that have been on display the longest are the cheapest, and the cards that are in the back of the line or the newest cards are the most expensive in game terms. And there's just a lot of tension in that mechanism alone as you're trying to kind of figure out, can I afford to wait and snag that card later? Do I think one of my opponents is going to grab it before me? Because everything in the game is driven by these cards. And so this market of cards that flows throughout the game is one of the sort of central features and points of tension and competition in the game in many ways. And it's one that I kind of find fascinating. So before we go on, I kind of broke my own rule there. Brent, do you want to just maybe give sort of a high-level overview of what the game is, the real super basics of how to play it, because as you said, it can be a little bit daunting to teach to people. Just so that if people are listening and they haven't had a chance to play it, they can at least get some sort of a visual or a frame of reference in their mind for what the game might be about.
Yeah, and I hope fans of the game forgive me for doing a great disservice to the game in the 60-second summary I'm about to give. But we'll get into the details, I'm sure. So basically, what Through the Ages is a tableau building game where you're managing simultaneous parallel resource engines using an action point allowance system, using two different kinds of action points, right? You have the white civil action points, which are things that you can do with take cards and put cards into play and so forth, and the military action points, which you can do far less actual individual actions with, but which are super, super important for reasons that aren't immediately obvious to people. So the game takes place through ages, technically five, but there's four ages of cards that each have two decks each, and you're going to be drafting cards, putting them into play, and the point is to score the most culture, which is the game's name for victory points. And there's a couple different ways. There's a number of different ways to generate culture through your buildings, through your wonders, like you would expect in a civilization building game. You can also steal culture from people in military campaigns and things of that sort. And then at the end of the game, there is a final scoring where there's an event deck system where it's a player-driven event deck where you will seed events that will occur later in the game, and all the age 3 events are final scoring. So if they have not triggered by the time the game ends, they will trigger at the end game and final scoring, and there are things like who has the most science production, who has the strongest military, and so forth, and things of that nature. And person with the most culture at the end of the game wins. And like I said, that's a very quick and dirty summary.
Well, it's a great summary because you managed to hit on all of the main mechanisms of the game and kind of give an idea of what the object of the game is and the point of the game is. So well done there, because you did that better than I could have. It is a game, like you said, you're managing multiple currencies and you're dealing with everything from trying to get, from a iron mine upgraded all the way. As the ages progress, your technology is going to progress. So you're going to have technology that produces metal, and you're going to have technologies that produce food. And these are all the real important sort of currencies that you're going to use in the game in order to sort of feed your civilization and to be able to build things, right? So it's not really like everything is made of iron. I think it's just kind of abstracted to those are the resources that you would use to build. Yep. And then your food, of course, is all of the resources that you would need to actually feed your population. One of the other really cool things about the game is that you have a population that will grow as the game goes. And as that population grows, you're going to have more opportunities and things that you can do. So instead of having 2 farms, you might be able to have 4 farms that are all working, producing extra food. And that food is going to be important for you in order to accomplish some of the goals that you have in your game. You can also have multiple mines and people working in those mines to churn out the resources so you can build that wonder or build that library or whatever it happens to be. Build an arena where people are going to go and play sports and get all pumped up and get them feeling exactly, keep them happy. And that's one of the, you mentioned this word happy because the morale of your people, the happiness of your people is something else that you really have to manage because the game kind of has a system that's built into it that's really complicated. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but suffice it to say, if you keep your people happy by keeping them busy, but not overworking them, and keeping them fed, they're going to be happy, and it's, good things are going to happen for you and your civilization. If you don't have enough resources for them, if there's a lot of people who are idle, who are unemployed, they're going to be kind of standing around looking at each other talking about what a crappy job you're doing running the civilization, and wouldn't it be better if we just gave Tina a chance, and got rid of Todd. Todd's a loser, let's get rid of that guy. And so you have to also manage that as well. And it's not a currency, but it's a facet of the game that is really, really important. Meanwhile, you are trying to not only upgrade buildings that you start with, your basic temple, your basic farm, your basic mine, but you're trying to add new buildings. And those new buildings represent just the growth of your civilization, whether it be a library, or whether it be like I said, an arena. It could be a theater. Theaters pop up later. All of these things are going to generate culture for you. They're also sometimes going to generate this sort of nationalistic, I kind of envision, like military strength, like the sort of sporting arenas generate military kind of strength for you. And so those things are going to be very important, because culture is how you win, but military is how you keep yourself from getting pounded into the dirt.
Oh my
and God. This is one of the things that I find really fascinating about the game, because for a game without a map, Brent, there sure is an awful lot of conflict and interaction. Could you maybe speak a little bit about the military side of things for a few moments?
Yeah, of course. So Through the Ages is very much a Euro game in a lot of ways that people might think about it, but it's very heads up. You have to pay attention to what everybody's doing at the table around you, because military strength is going to dictate a lot about what you are going to be able to do in the future. And it also, a lot of the events in the event deck that we mentioned are going to trigger and punish the person who's the weakest and reward the person who's the strongest. And then as you get later into starting in Age 2, you have wars, and people can start stealing technology from you. They can start stealing population, those yellow population cubes from you, from your yellow
just
bank.
Carrying your people off, man. Just carrying them off. It's terrible.
They're just taking the territory away from you. And then, of course, the big one in Age 3, they give me your culture. It's mine. Come on, give it to me. Give me. And a lot of that is resolved based on your relative military strengths. And military is... It's a lot of this. It's a kind of a common trope in the Through the Ages community to say that you can't necessarily win with exclusively military, but you can certainly lose. You will certainly lose by ignoring it. You ignore it at your own peril, which is, as abstracted as this game is very thematic if you think about it from the civilization standpoint. Like, these civilizations with these stronger military, for whatever you say about the morality of it, they're the ones that we remember historically. And that is reflected in this game very much when you have very strong military leaders who you can insert into your civilization, who can make life a nightmare for your opponents. And it's tied into the those red military actions that I mentioned, and how one of the things that's really interesting about this game as a new player is that everything is so drum tight. Like, everything, it's just an absolute Swiss watch, and you pull one piece out and everything just kind of goes whoosh. But it's just so tight. And it's not immediately obvious why those military actions are really important when you start playing. And then as you get better and you start to experience it, you realize, oh, with them, even though I don't have a stronger military, having more military actions means I could potentially spin it up much faster than my opponents, and I could surprise them or something of that nature.
Yeah, I think all those things are definitely true. Going to the, if you want to be a pacifist, this is not really the game to play. Unless you're playing with somebody who's also equally a pacifist, you're going to lose. And even if you're playing with someone who says they're going to be a pacifist, there might come a card that pops up and they're like, yeah, sorry. And then you get stabbed in the back. That there's a lot of that kind of potential in this game. And military is both important, as you said, from a defensive standpoint, but it's also important from an offensive standpoint. And I'm not just talking about offensively, like going and attacking someone. Some of the cards that you will seed into that event deck that you're referring to that gets built by the players are things like colonies. And these colonies, you need to take them over. And in the best and worst imperialist kind of way. And so when a colony is revealed, there's basically going to be a bid for it. And whoever is willing to sort of spend the most military is going to be able to claim that colony. And that colony might give them more population. It might give them a bunch of resources. It might just give them victory points or culture points. There's all kinds of things that you might get from a colony. And then if you start to sort of invest heavily in colonies and you start to use your military in that way, pretty soon you can find yourself in a very weakened position because you've sent your military overseas to go and sit on these colonies and keep them in line and keep them under control. And then, up jumps the devil, who you thought was your friend next to you, and they come in and attack you, and there's really nothing you can do about it because your military is already committed to your overseas kind of empire. And so that's another really sort of interesting part of the game is the colonies aspect and the investment in your military, because military is not easy to build. And one of the reasons for that is because when you build military, it's going to, of course, cost you some of that precious iron or, whatever it happens to be, bronze, iron, steel, eventually. I think it goes all the way up to steel, if I remember. And so you're using resources for that. All right, you're beating your plowshares into swords, as it were. And then you're also going to be diverting your population that could be manning that cool library or that science lab that's generating science points, which is going to help you learn cool new technologies, which is the type of card we haven't even talked about yet, Brent, which is the blue technology cards. So I might learn like navigation. And if I learn navigation, that gives me a bonus every time I go to do a colonization action. It's like, ooh, now I've got like a little combo thing going here, right? But you're having to take your population away from all of those things that you're doing in order to turn them into your military. And so there's this real kind of balancing act that you have to try to pull off between your production and manning, if you want to put it that way, the buildings that you have in your tableau, and then also having enough military presence so that you can accomplish the things that you need to do and defend yourself if necessary. So this is where that kind of micromanagement comes in. Isn't that kind of correct, Brent? Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd even take it a step further, because when you build a military unit, it requires a military action, and you don't draw the cards that allow you to seed the events and to defend yourself and to even draw the colonies you would want to colonize. The only way you draw them is with unused military cards at the end of your unused military actions at the end of your turn, up to a maximum of 3. You start the game with 2. So with 2 military actions, if you build one unit, one knight or one swordsman or one warrior, that's one less card you get to draw, which makes a big difference. And then if you start attacking your opponents and they can defend themselves, every time you attack them, it costs you military actions, which again means that's fewer units you can potentially build. That's one less card you're seeding into the event deck for potential scoring or to potentially wreak havoc on the other civilizations and so forth.
Yeah, there's just so many decision points in the game. It's one of those games that definitely can be AP producing. I definitely think there's no way to disagree with that, because there are so many decision points in the game. You are trying to accumulate those cards because, as Brent alluded to earlier, there's 2 decks of cards. So there's what's called the civil deck and the military deck. And the civil deck of cards is going to have all of those blue technology cards. It's going to have green leader cards. It's going to have all sorts of cards that all the different buildings, all the kinds of things that you're going to need to basically build your tableau in front of you in your civilization. It's also going to have those military unit cards, and it starts off with the most basic sort of, warriors, and then swordsmen, and then Knigets, as I call them, knights, in honor of Monty Python. And then from knights, then you go up to infantry, like think like World War I infantry, and then you get up to like World War II riflemen, and then you get up to all the way up to like tanks and planes and all sorts of crazy stuff, right? You have artillery, all of these different things, all of which are more and more expensive to build, but more and more potent and powerful. And so, I think the decisions that we're talking about here, Brent, that you're mentioning are really just kind of, there's nothing in the game that you can afford to put on autopilot. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it's a game of bottlenecks. It's a game of opportunistic bottleneck unclogging. So whether it's I have this opportunity to drive my military advantage, or I have this opportunity to drive my resource advantage through upgrading my bronze to iron, or science, which can be a huge boon too early in the game, or even just a population advantage, because you can flood yourself with population early. And if you have a leader like Frederick Barbarossa, you can just start plowing everyone into a huge military force and start really causing chaos in age 2, things of that nature. But you're not going to be able to do it all. Like you're going to have to sacrifice one area at least in order to drive an advantage in the other, because if you try to do everything, you're going to end up realizing you have nothing. And that's sort of the push-pull of the game. Am I going to take this card that costs me 2 civil actions early in the game? Because if I do, when you start a game with 4 civil actions, spending 2 is half of your turn to take a single card.
Yeah, just to get a card, and you can't even build that card because it's going to take so many resources to build it. So it's really an investment, right?
Oh, very much so. And that's where the strategy comes in, the planning. Which of these cards are worth 2, which aren't, some are worth 3. And I think it's something that's definitely built into the design of the game, where the cards are not of equal value, because some cards are so situational that they might be worth 1 civil action this one time in this specific opportunity, but otherwise you might just totally ignore it. However, it's a game where if you ignore a card always, you are doing it at your own game's peril, because there are those opportunities that card fits into a winning strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you also run up against another limitation in the game, which is your hand size. Mm-hmm. You can only hold so many cards. And so, you can try to plan ahead for the future as much as you possibly can and think to yourself, I'll grab this card now because this wave of nationalism card is going to give me all of this extra iron that I can use in order to build military units really quickly if I need to. So I'm just going to take this card. I'm going to hold on to it. You can't hold on to cards forever, or worse yet, you've got some cards in your hand that you took maybe because they were cheap, or you took because you thought you might be able to use them, and then they're kind of stuck in your hand and there's no way to really discard them. And so you end up with seeing this beautiful card come down, like irrigation comes down the pike, and you're like, oh my God, I want irrigation so bad. And you can't take the irrigation card to upgrade your farms because your hand is clogged with that wave of nationalism card. So there's all kinds of, like you said, it's a good way to put it, Brent, this idea of choke points, right? So your hand might become a choke point. Your population might become a choke point, right? I just don't have enough people to do the things that I need to do to generate what I need to generate. There's so many different things that could happen. You could become resource starved, just not seeing the upgrade cards that you need in order to basically increase the production of your resources. So at the start of the game, you start off with, I think, bronze mine, right? Basically.
Bronze mines, 2 agricultural farms, 1 warrior and 1 philosophy, and an unbuilt temple. You start with temple religion as the discovered technology, but it's unbuilt.
Yeah, it's just kind of sitting there. And that's another thing that I think is worthwhile circling back to in a second here. But there's going to be each of the population tokens that's on that bronze card represents, if you want to think of it this way, a bronze mine or a worker in a bronze mine. And each of them is going to produce 1 bronze for you. Later on, you can upgrade to iron, which I believe means that each of those people, you still only have 2 population on that card. But if you upgrade to the next level, each of those people now generates 2. So now you've doubled, in effect, your production. You've gone from 2 to 4. And then if you can upgrade it again, each of them will be worth 3. And then you can eventually upgrade all the way, I think, like to oil, at level 5. Yeah. So that each one is worth 5. So, that's another kind of choke point, because if I'm playing you, Brent, and I see that you've got this awesome civilization and military buildup, and I'm a little worried about you, I might start intentionally, if I have room in my hands, snatching up some of those cards that you need in order to upgrade, just to starve you of resources or to starve you of food or something of that nature, so that I can slow you down. It's a way that I can kind of put the brakes on you and force you to maybe start going and exploring, looking for some colonies where you can go and pillage some resources from them, so that you can, get some, because you're kind of being starved of them yourself at home. And so I find that to be another really interesting sort of interactive part of the game, because the game really is, as you said, it's a heads-up game. It's highly interactive. And that's just another example of that interactivity. One of the other things I wanted to ask you about, Brent, was, we talked a little bit about the technology cards, the blue cards, which could be like justice, right? Like a justice system, code of laws, justice system. These are going to give you extra civil actions, which is going to become really important as the game moves on, that you have more actions available to you because you have more resources. And if you don't have the actions to utilize those resources, it's kind of a waste. And then if you let your resources build up to a point where you're just kind of swimming in them, then that causes corruption. And then people just start, like, the black market fires up and they start stealing your stuff. And you're like, wait a minute, I had all this food stored. You telling me mice ate it? And, and you got some dude sitting off in the corner picking the seeds out of his teeth. Oh, yeah, it was mice. It was mice. That's it. That's what it was, and that it actually, fell off the wagon and got sold for a lot of money, and you're kind of stuck, right? So there's another problem that can pop up that you have to kind of try and manage. And so these cards, these technology cards, really become important because they'll boost your military technology or strength. They'll boost your civil actions. They will boost all kinds of, they could boost your science rating, all these different things that they do. But we haven't really talked about the leader cards. You referenced Barbarossa, but the leader cards are another one of those cards that I think sometimes people initially sort of overlook. And a leader, I think, can help give you some directionality in a game that seems to be completely open-ended. So when I first started playing, it was easy for me to feel sort of overwhelmed by all of the choices that I had. But once I picked a leader, the leader suggests a direction that I might want to explore. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, the way I like to look at it is the leaders are the asymmetry in the game, because the game starts up as a symmetric system where everybody starts with the same base level of things, right? You have, like I said, you have the same number of iron mines or bronze mines, the same number of agricultural farms. But the two things that differentiate every civilization from each other is the leaders and then the wonders, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit. But the leaders are interesting because new players especially have a difficult relationship with them. So I'll give you an example. Aristotle, which is a really good example of someone who doesn't really understand the game can really get really trapped by Aristotle, even though I think he's a wonderful leader. Aristotle gives you 1 science for every time you take a technology card from the card row. Every time you get 1 science. And there are lots and lots of technologies in the card row. You've got orange technologies, which are governments, blue technologies, which you mentioned, like are navigation and code of laws. And then you have the red technologies, which are military, brown, which are the farms and the mine upgrades, and then the grays, which are the urban buildings. So anytime you take one of those cards, Aristotle gives you science. So you're like, yeah, so now I'm just going to take all these technology cards. But as you alluded to earlier, you have a very hard cap on a number of cards you can hold in your hand, which is equal to the number of civil actions you have, which at the beginning of the game is 4. So if you're a player with not a lot of experience and you have Aristotle as your leader and you're really leaning into his capability of giving you more science, you're going to find your hand clogged up with a lot of useless technologies that you can't really use. So it's this fine line between, he gives you a direction, absolutely, but you still have to keep your eyes on the bigger picture, because if you lean too hard into any one leader's thing and say, I need to use their ability every single turn, with a couple exceptions, but generally, if you just try to maximize everybody all the time, you're going to find yourself in bottlenecks in ways that you weren't able to anticipate.
Yeah, it's an excellent way to put it. That's true. I think no matter which of the leaders that you take, with the exception maybe of, I think Hammurabi. I think the only thing Hammurabi does is he gives you an extra civil action. And so he's almost like a passive kind of a leader. He's an early leader, obviously. Historically, he's early, and you put him into play, you get an extra civil action, and it's like, woohoo, okay, and that's it. You don't have, he's like a low maintenance sort of a leader. Later on, you get into leaders where you're really looking for specific, then meeting the requirements of the leader to maximize that leader's impact on the game, whether it be someone like Aristotle or Isaac Newton or I think it's Shakespeare, I think, with all of the theaters, or you end up having it's either Napoleon or Genghis Khan. I think Genghis Khan does something fittingly with cavalry, but I think it's Napoleon, where each different type of unit, I think you have, am I remembering that correct, Brent, increases your strength?
Yeah, so there's 4 types of military units: infantry, artillery, cavalry, and air force. And for each type, Napoleon gives you +2 military strength that you have. So
right, which can be devastating.
Air force, which is
yeah. Yes, Napoleon with an Air Force, yeah. And I've heard some criticisms while we're talking about Napoleon with an Air Force, Brent. I have heard people level some criticisms at the thematic content of the game when they point out the fact that you could have, a modern leader who has like the most basic warrior military unit. And so they have all these, warriors, which are basically, super low level, going up against, somebody's riflemen. And, it's sort of incongruous, the way that some of the technologies can come out and develop. Is that something that you've experienced? Do you think there's a legitimate criticism there, or is that just kind of a nitpicking? What would be your comments about that kind of thing?
I think it kind of depends on how much enjoyment you get out of thematic drive in a game. If you're someone who's very theme forward, a lot of this stuff might bug you. One of the things I always point out that I think is kind of strange thematically is Genghis Khan. One of the best combos he has is with the Great Wall Wonder. Strange. I will take that combo, but it's a little sort of like inverted from how you would understand the history of how Genghis Khan and the Great Wall interacted in actual history. I think I like to make fun of the fact that you can have Napoleon leading a modern army led with Air Force aerial support and waging war on people. Now for me, I've played it so much that kind of like drops into the background and it just kind of like fades away, and it's just the way it is. But I absolutely get why people have an issue with that sort of thing, and that's something that's really endemic to most Civilization games. It's just really hard to avoid, and I think Through the Ages does an okay job with the antiquating. Either die, you can't keep them for the whole game, even though you can functionally keep Napoleon for, assuming a certain event called Iconoclasm, which will kick him out. Assuming you can hold on to him, he can stick around until basically the penultimate turn of the game, and he will give you an extra, like I said, an extra 8 strength, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but especially in a 2-player game where it's 0 sum, like an 8 strength difference can be a very, very significant if you're resolving a war or something of that nature.
Absolutely, and I've seen him use like a cudgel.
He's been nerfed in the expansion. They rebalanced a lot of the cards even further. So with Old Story, you had Napoleon, who was this unstoppable god. And then in the new story, you had Napoleon, who people still complained about. And then they nerfed him further in this sort of expansion where they have the rebalance cards. So he's not The new version, which I'm not sure, I don't have CGE's release schedule in front of me, but it's coming out. The physical version is coming out soon, and I think if you don't even want the expansion, it might be worth it just to have the sort of everything's rebalanced and put together. So he's not so much a cudgel as he is maybe a handheld that you can kind of knock people over the head with.
Gotcha. I just had to heave something at my dog because she's snoring so badly sitting over there that I'm worried it's getting by the microphone. And then I missed. And so it just went slamming into the floor over there. But it did get her attention. So I don't think she's snoring quite the way she was before. So if you see me kind of do one of these, it's because I'm not, lobbing a grenade. I'm lobbing something at the dog, something soft. I'm not abusing my dog. Yes, there you are. Anyway, sorry about that. I just didn't want the snoring sound effect on there. I was like, man, that guy from the long view is really rude. He put a snoring sound effect in while Brent was talking.
So boring.
Anyway. So, we definitely need to get to a new story here in a second, but I just want to kind of wrap up just the sort of basics of the game, talking about something that you alluded to, which is the governments, because this is another part of the game that I really thought was brilliant in its design. So everybody starts off with your sort of basic government, which I think is, what is it? Is it... it's just like despotism or something. Yeah. So you're just a despot, running your own little place there. And some of these cards that are going to come out are going to allow you the opportunity to upgrade your government into maybe a monarchy or a theocracy or a democracy or a republic or what have you. And the reason you're going to want to do this is because it's going to immediately boost usually your civil actions and or your military actions that you have available to you every turn. So it's really important that you upgrade your government. And then the cool thing about it that I loved was that there are two different ways that you can upgrade your government. Can you talk about that for a sec, Brent, and let people know how that works? Because I think that's a fascinating system.
Yeah. So government is a technology in the game, which means it costs science, which is one of the resources you're producing throughout the game. But it has two different costs. It has a very expensive cost and then a very deeply discounted cost. And the very expensive cost, you could just pay the full price. So monarchy costs 8. You can pay 8 science for monarchy, which in age 1 is prohibitively expensive, very, very. And you just continue with your turn. Or for the low price of 2 science, you can effectively forfeit your entire turn, and you can have a revolution, which basically overthrows the despotism, installs a monarchy. You lose all of your civil actions for that turn, but you do get, so monarchy has 5 civil actions and 3 military actions versus 4 and 2 for despotism. You still have access to your military actions. That's actually very important for someone like Hammurabi, who can use a military action as a civil action. But generally speaking, if you revolt, you are saying, I'm punting on this turn. And early, if you get monarchy very early, that can be a huge boon, because getting that, there's something magical about that 5th civil action. It just like unlocks the secrets of the world or something. Because you can do nothing, and you're just like corrupt all the time, like you mentioned. And people are stealing your stuff, and I can't hold any cards, and I can't take anything that I want. And I'm getting pounded on, and all of a sudden you have 5. And you're like, oh, hey, there's this card for 2 civil actions I can afford now. Oh, I can hold an extra card in my hand. And it's just a totally different experience with just 1 extra civil action. Like the knife's edge that balance is put upon is amazing. It's incredible. And there are 2 different governments in age 1. There are 2 different governments in age 2: constitutional monarchy, which is, I'm going to talk about civil actions and military actions, 6 and 4 for constitutional monarchy, and then republic, which is 7 and 2. And then you've got 3 different ones in age 3. And now they're so expensive that you're not generally going to go from an age 1 to an age 2 to an age 3. That is a profligate use of your science in the game. But that's generally true if you're going to upgrade like anything from 1 to 2 to 3. It's usually not advisable, strategically speaking. But you can only have 1 government. unlike your mines, which you can have both. Theoretically, you could have both a bronze mine and an iron mine. With the government, if you're in monarchy, you can't also be a democracy. You can only be one or the other, and that's really important because they don't stack. So the number of civil actions that you have for monarchy, if you're going to replace it later on, it doesn't add all of the additional civil actions and military actions. You just get what the card says you get.
And that's an important point because, as you said, it can really change the focus of your game. Like Theocracy, for example, is going to not give you too much of a boost in your civil actions, but it's going to give you a lot of boost in your military actions.
That gives you no boost to your civil actions.
Yeah, it's kind of a, it's going to steer you definitely in a direction. And you had mentioned, I think, Democracy, which was 7 and 2. That's going to steer you in that direction.
7 and 3, and it also gives you 3 culture a turn.
Okay. Well, then that's pretty nifty. But you're right about the upgrade costs, and I love that idea of, do you change through revolution and lose a turn, or do you change your government peacefully? I think that was a really neat design element that he put in there. And then, as with everything in this game, there is always some kind of combos or things that you can pull off. So, for example, there's a leader, Robespierre, and Robespierre is perfect for the person who is government curious because what it allows you to do is basically swap out a government at the revolution cost, if I'm remembering him correctly, without having to forfeit your entire turn. And then what I found particularly effective with Robespierre is Robespierre will often be a leader that I will have, and then I will get rid of him as quickly as I can. So he's really good for that one situation. And then you kind of want to replace him. You want to get rid of him because, I don't know how trustworthy he is. And so I find that to be like a really, really interesting sort of flow in the game as well, because no matter what the problem is, there's usually a card or a couple of cards that's going to help you navigate through that difficulty or make an advantage out of something that might have previously been a disadvantage. So that's one of the things that I think is just really fascinating about this game. So I started off with the basic game, with the original game. I don't want to call it basic, the original game. And then after a while, the reprint came out. And the reprint did quite a few significant things, just from a sort of an ergonomic standpoint. It got rid of these terrible little tiny little round discs that were yellow and blue that just rolled everywhere and were impossible to manage from the first edition. And the player boards kind of got like larger. We started using cubes instead of the little round discs. Everything was kind of given like a nice new polish and a shine. And there were some adjustments that I had heard that were made to the game. And, it was re-released as a new version, which I picked up and had the chance to get to the table a few times. I think probably about 3 or 4 times. I played the original a whole lot more than that. And then, as you were talking about, Brand, I got the app. And, once I got the app, I played it constantly for a while. And so can you talk a little bit about the differences between maybe the original that we've sort of been talking about and then what happened with the new edition that came out?
Yeah, so in 2015, the CGE released what is called Through the Ages, a New Story of Civilization. We've kind of been talking relatively interchangeably about the game system as a whole, but most of the stuff I'm going to be talking about from here on out is going to be very, very specific to New Story, because, like I said, that's where my understanding of the game lies. Now I know I know plenty about Old Story. So they really tuned the military system to make it a little bit, actually a lot more defensively oriented in New Story. In Old Story, if you were defending yourself against an aggression, you had to use these defense cards. There were 2 defense each, and that's all you could defend yourself with. But in New Story, now you can use any military card as +1 defense, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in a game with these minor marginal edges actually makes a sizable difference. They nerfed a lot of the military leaders. They boosted a lot of the culture producers. Hammurabi, who you had mentioned before, who my understanding was borderline unplayable in Old Story, is now probably the best AJ leader in the game because of a simple change that they made to him, which was instead of, so in Old Story, you gained a civil action with him, but you lost a military action. But in New Story, instead, you still have 2 military actions, but you may, if at your option, use one of those military actions as a civil action, which is a world of difference. And those sorts of details, and they also really streamline the cost structure of everything. So the cost structures of things are very, very different. And I know the cost structures of New Story backwards and forwards, and which is actually a core reason why the game gets easier as you learn it, because these things get internalized very, very quickly. Like, I know journalism costs 6 science, and it costs 8 rocks. And I just know that off the top of my head. And, but I don't know if the cost is the same. And I know the relative differences are in Old Story. So they streamlined all the cost structures. They changed a lot of the science costs of things. They totally changed the leaders in a lot of cases. Like Genghis Khan in New Story is very, very strong, and in Old Story, not super strong. And it really changed the timbre of the game, and strategic focus was different. Now, there are still people who play Old Story and still enjoy it, and there's a community that still plays it, and you can go play it online and play it with the best players in the world if you want to. But the app that came out is New Story. The expansion is exclusively for New Story. And the game that is being supported today that people are talking about, and generally, unless they're being specifically referring to Old Story, generally when someone says my favorite game is TTA, they're probably talking about the version that came out in 2015. Maybe not, but in my experience, it's usually the case.
So they really did some balancing, is what it sounds like. Things that had popped up, which isn't surprising when you're talking about literally the hundreds and hundreds of cards that make up the game. Invariably, there was going to be something that was going to perhaps be a little bit out of whack. Although I do have to say, considering the sheer scope and number of cards in that game, I'm surprised there wasn't more. It seems like nowadays, you have games that come out with these sort of broken combos and things that can really swing a game completely towards one player or away from another player and what have you. And this is an example, I think, of a game that was originally play-tested really, really well, because I didn't see too many flaws with the original, but the New Story, as you said, feels a little bit more balanced. And to me, the biggest change was that military change, because if somebody got a military advantage, a lot of times in the game, you're going to be comparing military strengths, and your opponent is going to be able to steal resources or steal culture points or what have you, equal to the difference in your military strength. And so if someone has a very robust kind of military engine going, where they have something, ridiculous. I've seen strengths, way up there, but let's just say for the sake of argument, they have 17 and I have 5. That's going to be crippling, right? But the difference between 17 and 5, or 17 and me emptying my hand of a bunch of military cards to boost myself to 9 or 10, huge, absolutely huge. And so I think that that's probably the single most significant change that was made, and one that I definitely appreciate, because it used to be, as you said, one of the first things you said, Brent, was you might not be able to win with military, but if you ignore it, you're probably definitely going to lose. I think you said something to that effect. And that was really the first edition was very much, it felt like an arms race. It really did. It felt like you had to keep up with your opponents, because if you didn't keep up, you were sure to probably lose the game, more than likely. I mean, there were some times when I saw someone build such a huge culture engine that they were able to make up for those losses by cranking out, 12 culture a turn or something ridiculous. But for the most part, you weren't going to come out on top if you didn't keep pace with military. So it really was an arms race. And every time somebody, upgraded a technology, you had a choice: divert more of my population towards this lower tech to equal out that boost in military that they got, or I'm going to have to tech up myself, and that's going to cost me resources to upgrade. It's going to cost me science. It's going to cost, and then I got to try and move my population from. Because when you upgrade, you basically can take a population token from one card and move it up to another card. And all of this stuff is taking time, resources, and it really can feel like you're kind of engaged in this sort of nuclear arms race that is sucking the GDP of everybody's country into this one particular area. Whereas with the new version, I kind of feel like, as you already said, it kind of nerfs that a little bit and makes it so that you can't ignore military, but you don't have to be as obsessed with it, I think, as I was before. Would you say that's an apt description?
Sort of. It still can devolve into an arms race. A lot of the game, the timber is player dependent in a lot of cases. It's also card row dependent. Sometimes the military cards just don't come out, and so your opportunities to upgrade them very quickly don't materialize as soon as they might in other cases. But I've played enough games with enough aggressive players to know that it still can really do that, especially in Age 3. One of the things about military that's really important to understand for people who aren't familiar with the game is, yes, your military strength comes from your units, but a large percentage of it is also going to come from these cards called tactics, which are military cards that basically give you a strength bonus for every formation that is supplied by the tactic. So, for instance, like in H2, there's one called Defensive Army. And so for every 2 infantry and 1 artillery you have, you get extra 6, more or less. So if you have 2 of those armies, which is 4 infantry and 2 artillery, you will have an extra 12 strength. Mm-hmm. But then there's a card in Age 3 that we talked about called Air Forces. And Air Forces is still this card that a lot of people talk about. And actually, when we talk about military, there's actually a very important rule I want to talk about that's very controversial. But I'm actually think warrants a lot of discussion. And let's get back to that in a second. But Air Forces doubles the strength of 1 army for each Air Force that you build. So if you have a defensive army and you build an Air Force, you get the 5 strength for the Air Force, and then an additional 6 on top of that. And if you have 2 defensive armies, another Air Force is going to give you another 11 on top. Mm-hmm. So really, this curve just starts to grow and grow and grow until you get to the degree where you've got someone with the equivalent of 4 modern armies, which is 13 times 4 plus whatever, blah, 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 blah. And then they just steal all your culture, and it's very sad.
Mm-hmm. just lay waste.
Yeah, but I actually think, and this is actually a good sort of insert point to talk about a rule that I think is super, super important and really critical to the incentive structure of the game, which is resignation. For a political action, because the game is played in 2 phases: the political phase where you take a political action, and then the civil phase where you're taking cards and building things. For a political action, you can legally quit. And the person, if you resign, and you resign to someone who waged a war on you, that person gets 7 culture. That's it. That's what they get. They get 7 culture and the benefit of knocking one of their opponents out in the game. Now, the reason why it's controversial is because some people don't like the idea that you can legally bow out of the game. But personally, I think it's a super important incentive structure layer on top of it that prevents the game from devolving into the situation where you just annihilate the people who are the weakest. Because if you're going to wage a huge war on someone, you have to take into consideration whether or not you think that person is going to resign. If they don't resign, yes, you get the bounty of your war that you waged on them. But if you do, and you were counting on that technology you were going to steal, or you were counting on those yellow tokens in the war on territory, or this was your big military play to get all that culture you were building up for, and you only get 7, you're SOL. Like, you should have considered that. And it's weird because it's like this metagame rule, and some people don't even know it exists, and there are people who are very staunchly against even doing it. They say, I refuse to resign. And I feel like, the rule is in there specifically because it changes how people behave with each other relative to these strength differentials, but it's super important to prevent those circumstances where someone's just wailing on someone who's just weaker than they are the entire game.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with it, I think, because I kind of have come. I played a lot of war games when I was younger, actually. And the idea of resigning and saying, you know what, I'm looking at this board. You've done a great job. You've outmaneuvered me. My supply lines are broken. We can play this out. We can play this out, and you're going to win. I don't see any exit point for me. So congratulations. Give you my hand, and we can set it up again, and we can play again. But no, I'm going to resign. I don't think there's anything wrong with that personally. I think it goes against the stated goal of Eurogames, which is usually no player elimination. Everybody gets to play. Everybody gets to finish the game that they start. Nobody gets knocked out. However, the reason I think I find myself in agreement with you, Brent, is that no one likes to be the person getting punched in the face over and over and over. And to make a player sit there and go through that, I think is borderline mean. And, what we have here, as you said, is sort of a metagame kind of rule, which says if you keep punching this poor guy or this poor lady in the face over and over, they're just going to drop, which, as you said, might completely derail all of your plans. And it also, is going to get that person out of a really bad situation. I mean, I don't care how good of a sport you are. If you're getting creamed and you have no chance in the game and you're going to become an afterthought, I think one of the people that I talked with in the past talked about the idea of not player elimination, but player irrelevance. When you become irrelevant as a player, it really kind of sucks all the joy out of it for that person. And it's not really, I don't know that it accomplishes anything other than, make someone feel bad. And the bottom line is we're supposed to play these games to have fun.
Yeah.
And if you're kind of doing that and you're hitting somebody, I really like the idea that somebody can just say, you know what, go ahead. You're the new overlord. All hail the overlord. Fantastic. But you know what? We're going to burn everything before you come in.
Yep.
We're going to do what the Russians did. We're going to pull back, just like the Soviets, I guess I should say. The Soviets pulled back and scorched everything, blew everything up so that the advancing Nazi army had nothing that they could take from the land that they conquered. So, yeah, sure. Go ahead. Take it. I leave you nothing. I leave you nothing but my curses. And then you can sit back as the player who was eliminated. Either you can go play another game or you can sit back and watch that person burn because they didn't get what they thought they were going to get.
People get really mad, too, when they're expecting that to happen and then someone resigns from under them. I've seen people get really mad because the sort of other side of scorching your earth is just being a resource farm for everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, here, just take everything I have. And while I think that well-timed military campaigns and through the ages is absolutely critical, you have to understand when to take those shots, why you are doing it. And if you're just trying to lay waste to the landscape, regardless of what anybody else is going to do, there's a chance you're going to pay for it. Now, there is a bigger sort of metagame issue, and this is more relevant, I think, in the competitive scene than anywhere else, is there are, like I said, there are people who absolutely refuse to resign, and there are people like me who I have no problem resigning. I resign. If I feel like I can't do anything to improve my position or I feel like I'm toast, I resign. I'm not too proud to do that. But then there's people who have information about who they know will resign and who they know won't. And that gives them a very significant advantage because it's well, I have this war on territory. I know Jeff refuses to resign. So, and even though I have this, even though I'm going to take 5 yellow tokens from him, he just won't resign because he just refuses, just on principle. So even though I have a bigger military advantage over Brent, I'm going to wage the war on Jeff because Brent will resign and Jeff won't.
Right.
That will happen.
Yeah, that is a danger. But again, I don't know. I think it also, as you said, I think the competitive scene is different than the regular sort of game playing scene,
It is.
and the competitive scene can bring that stuff out. Um, Whereas you think about just sitting around with some friends, or playing online with some of your friends, you're not going to do that to them. You're not going to force them to play a game that clearly they've lost, and chances are you're not going to put them in that position anyway, because I don't know about you, but a lot of times if I'm playing live with friends of mine, I'll go after the person that is the strongest before I'll smack around the person that's the weakest, simply because I know kicking somebody when they're down is kind of like, if you do that and you kind of make that player irrelevant, they're never going to play that game again. And my goal is for you to play the game again. So I'd rather go head to head with you and only gain half the resources that I could have gained by smacking him around, just so that everybody at the table has a good time. And I know there's people who would say, well, that's against the spirit of gaming, and they're welcome to that opinion, and that's fine. But that's kind of the way that I look at it, because I've been involved, Brent, in too many 18xx games where I'm done. Like, I'm toast. I am never going to get back in that game. Yes. Yep. But it's like I got to sit there another 3 hours while I watch everybody else play it out, while I sit there. And it's like, it doesn't really make me want to play a lot of 18xx games because of that player irrelevance, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty delicate about who I break the physical game out with for a lot of those reasons. Partially is because the skill gap is so big between someone who's played the game hundreds of times and someone who's played it twice. And with new players in particular, I will not play the game with a new player unless I'm playing it 2-player only.
Right. Yeah.
For a lot of reasons. One of them is just the time it takes to play a new player, but also because I can sit there across the table. I'm not someone who likes to play someone else's game for them, but if they want to ask me a question and say, what would you do? I can answer that honestly and not impact anybody else's enjoyment of the game. I can say, look, I'm not going to take it easy on you. I'm going to let you know that it's going to be a rough seas, but we can talk about it through.
Right.
And I want you to play. Like, I want you to play, but I also respect you as a person in the game enough to try to do.
Sure. Yeah. But there's a difference between beating someone and beating up on them, especially in this game, like you said, where there's such a skill gap. Yeah. And it's true of 18xx titles too. I mean, if you're playing with someone who's an ambassador for that style of game, they're going to be trying to help you, because they understand that if you sort of become really frustrated, you're never going to want to play again. And the bottom line is we all want people to play these games with us because it's fun. And it's a social interaction that you don't get a lot nowadays. And so, the goal is to get everybody together and have a good time in a competitive environment, but not a knife fight, not where it's like, I'm going to steal your children. Nobody wants that. You just want to play the game. So, anyway, but thanks for bringing up that rule, because that is something that I've heard some people discussing. I never gave it a lot of thought, but in a competitive environment, like you said, where people are looking at rankings and maybe a tournament at the WBC or something, I could see people getting really bent out of shape about it. You had talked about this new expansion that's coming out, where there's going to be some new changes. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that before we sort of draw this to a close, and tell us a little bit about maybe what you see in this expansion?
Sure. So the expansion is a new set, an entire new set of leaders, and an entire new set of wonders for each age, A, 1, 2, and 3, and then some new military cards, some new events, a couple new tactics, and one new colony. And the way that the expansion is designed to work is you can certainly play the game with just the expansion cards, just as you can play the game with just the base game cards. You can just swap them out. But the way the game is going to be sort of intended when you include the expansion is you're going to pick at random a selection of leaders and wonders for each age from the entire pool of expansion cards and base game cards. And then you will know what those cards are, and they will be out on the table, and there will be kind of like placeholder cards that come out. And so you will assign like leader 1 to like maybe Columbus is leader 1 in age 1. And then when the leader 1 age 1 card pops out in the card row, then you pop Columbus on there. So that way you're not guessing like, what do I do? Because it's really important for you to plan. Like, is it important that I hold on to this card? Is it important that I draft it? And it matters which leaders and wonders are in the game. And the leaders and wonders really, really change the game a lot. They do some things that really bend the economy of the game in a way that players who are not familiar with the expansion might be really surprised with. One of the, and this I don't know how familiar you are with the expansion, Jeff.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. So I'm excited to hear about this.
There are, I think I'd have to count, but I think 8 new yellow tokens in the game, non-colony based yellow tokens. And you know how difficult it is to get yellow tokens.
Yeah.
And there are wonders that give you yellow tokens. There is a new leader, Catherine the Great, who can steal a yellow token from an opponent. There's a new leader who gives Hippocrates, who gives you a yellow token that basically what he does is in the age 1 to 2 changeover, normally you use 2 yellow tokens. If you have Hippocrates, you functionally only lose 1.
Okay.
Things like that. And that's a big difference because there's more population to go around. And then there's the new tactics, which cause the ability to have more strength. They tuned a lot more defensively. One of the mechanics we didn't discuss that they eliminated from New Story, from Old Story, was the concept of sacrificing a unit, which in Old Story, as you know, if you're doing a war or an aggression resolution, you can basically sacrifice one of your military units back to the Yellow Bank to gain its strength. You can't do that in New Story, except if you have Himeji Castle as your wonder, which allows you to do it. So now there's this asymmetry to it. And so it tunes it. There's more defensive based cards in there. There's a lot more strength. You see a lot more strength in the 70s and 80s. And
wow. Okay.
A lot. Like it's not just like one person's able to get there and just stomp on everyone. Like because of all the tokens in the game, spinning up military very fast, in age 3 is more common. Which also, yes, it can lead to huge wars, but it also can lead to just like these sort of like Cold War eye blinks where people are like, I'm at 79 and I'm at 82.
Right.
And there's also a wonder, Manhattan Project, which kind of acts as a nuclear deterrent, right? It's a wonder, an age 3 wonder. Now, most age 3 wonders only score, right? Only score. Manhattan Project scores your science rating, but it also gives you 13 strength, which is the equivalent of the strongest tactic in the game. And you don't have to spend military actions in order to build it. It's, things of that nature. So, but every single game, and I said this game did not need an expansion, but it has one, and it has blown the game open in terms of variability because the combinatorics of which leaders in the game and which wonders in the game are so different that suddenly even the urban building differences are totally different depending on who's in the game. So there are leaders who make arenas super, super powerful.
Okay.
In arenas, historically, people weren't too interested in them. But now, if you have Nelson Mandela or Pierre de Coubertin in the game, suddenly you're a lot more interested because they can be culture generators. And actually, the thing that's interesting about the expansion is I went back and I took a look at sort of the promos and the fan-made expansions that were available for Old Story. There was a fan-made expansion that was New Leaders and Wonders, and then CGE released some promos in Spain and Poland and the Czech Republic. And there's a lot of very new ideas in this new expansion, but there's also like kind of amalgamated and redeveloped ideas that are kind of brought to the fore and sort of codified into like official, this is the expansion that you're getting as well. So things that if people are familiar with some of those, like Harvard College, which was a BGO expansion card, is now a wonder. It's an official wonder in H2 in the expansion, things of that nature.
Nice, nice. So you're talking about greater input variability,
Yeah,
and with greater input variability, you're going to have different sort of possible paths and decision points that you're going to be led to because of the different possible combinations of cards, leaders, and wonders and whatnot that you're going to be seeing. So it sounds like a bit of a no-brainer as far as picking it up if you are a fan of the game. Is it readily available, or is it coming?
so it's available on the app right now. The digital version has been out since September. They had a printing error. They were intended to release it at Essen, but they had a printing error with card backs not matching and things of that sort. So they kind of delayed it and reprinted it. And I don't know what the exact release schedule is. I'm sure someone from CGE on the forums has updated on BGG and so forth.
Right.
I would expect it soonish, like Q1 soon.
Okay.
I'm not an official representative of CGE. I have no insight into the actual release schedule. I don't know, but it's coming very, very soon. And in addition to the new leaders and wonders, they have gone and rebalanced some of the old leaders and wonders in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So they've nerfed Hammurabi, and they've buffed Shakespeare and buffed Gandhi and things like that, and nerfed Napoleon, like I mentioned. And those also, even if you don't play with the expansion because you think it's too much, which it may be, those rebalanced cards actually really does improve the game experience. Just those cards alone, and I think even just for that, it's worth getting.
Well, thanks for a rundown on that expansion, because I hadn't had a chance to play it or even try it, so I was very curious about it. And to me, the exciting thing about it is it sounds like the game is still kind of being supported, developed. There's stuff that's coming out. I think the app has gotten more people involved in playing the game competitively, and also, like you mentioned, honing their skills. Right, this is a game that you get better at with repeated play, and if you get those repeated plays on the app, you're still gaining some good experience. So the next time you play face-to-face, you're going to have some more ideas of how things could unfold and where the pitfalls and dangers are. And so I think the app's beautiful. I've played the app quite a bit, and I really have enjoyed my plays of it. Either I'm a really bad player, which is incredibly possible, maybe even probable, but I have found some of the challenges to be difficult. The AIs, some of them are fairly robust. I've had difficulty beating them, and so I've kind of found that the app is quite good, and I've really enjoyed my plays of it, and it just kind of gets me hankering to get it to the table more often than unfortunately I do. But I'm really excited to check out that expansion when that thing comes out. And maybe in the meantime, I'll take your advice, Brent, and check it out on the app and see what kind of changes that I notice from the get-go. And it's just interesting because so many things you mentioned I wouldn't have thought about, like the placeholder cards and putting out the leaders and the wonders in advance so that people know what's coming. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, why in God's name would you do that? And then, you kind of prove the point. It's like, well, in the original game, you know what's coming. You know who the leaders are. You know what the wonders are. And there's a lot of decisions that you might make based on that, right? And now, so if you're going to change that mixture up, you probably should let people know what's in there. That's a really clever way to accomplish that, to be able to put those cards in there that'll come out. And it's like, oh, okay, when this card comes out, we replace that card with this wonder. And so now there it is. It's come out. And everybody will get a chance to try and see if they can snag it before somebody else and build it or put that leader into play or whatnot. So it sounds like it's a really well thought out expansion full of lots of good ideas, and the corrected cards, as you said, or retooled cards instead of saying corrected, but the reworked cards, I think, is another real bonus to that as well. So Brent, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about with a new story of civilization or the expansion before we kind of wrap this thing up, draw to a close?
Jeff, I could talk about it all day long, so I don't want to overshoot it. I'll say, let me say that a couple things. One, I think that the app, I don't play a ton of digital implementations of games. but the app of Through the Ages is in my opinion, the best instantiation of a board game in digital form I've ever played. It's so good, and it gives people access to the game and gives people access to play it against other people. And the one thing that I did want to mention before we kind of sign off is I want to address the competitive scene just a little bit, because it's really important and close to my heart. I'm involved in the competitive scene. I run one of the tournaments. It's something where it's a game where there is the app has basically created this. The shark community that existed has now exploded, and now they've got just tons and tons of people who are super, super good at this game, which is one of the things I really like about games. Is anytime I take a look at a game, I think if there's a really active shark community, that's probably a game I'm going to like. And this one has it. And there are, off the top of my head, I'm sure there's more, 7 competitive tournaments and leagues that I can think of. I'm sure there are more that I don't know of. And you can play against people of all skill sets and at any time you want. And it plays really well asynchronously. And I kind of sound like I'm plugging the app, and I don't intend to. I'm just trying to say how what the app has done is it breathed an incredible amount of new life into a game that I thought was so amazing to begin with, and really expanded the audience. And I think because of it, this game will have a very, very long life, and it already has. I mean, it's been out, as you mentioned, since 2006. I think it'll be played in another 15 years. I think people are still going to be playing this game.
Well, thanks for the tip there and the encouragement for people to check out the app. I agree. It's a beautiful implementation of it. I waited forever for it, but once they finally got it out, I think they did a good job with it. I've really enjoyed playing that. And I mean, to me, the highlights of the apps that I've probably played would be this one and Agricola. Those two are just really, really well designed and well thought out. And so, yeah, I totally agree with you. If you're looking to kind of get in and explore the game, it's a great way to do it, either against the AI or against live players. So, Brent, I want to thank you for reaching out and suggesting that we revisit this game, because it has definitely stood the test of time. It's a classic. It's gone through some changes, but the changes have been, I think, in a lot of ways, just minor tweaks to a really impressive system. It wasn't an overhaul. You know, this game didn't really need a complete overhaul. At its core, it's an incredibly solid design. I think it might be my favorite design of Lotta Chvátil's. This and Galaxy Trucker. I mean, those are just great games. Absolutely think that this is a worthy game, I should say, for people to check out. And I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts and spending the time to talk with us about it today.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, if you're curious about the app, you can go to the App Store. I believe it is both on iOS and Android. Can you get it on Android as well, Brent?
Android, iOS, and Steam.
And Steam. Yeah, okay, great. So it is out there if you want to check it out. If you're thinking about picking up the game, I would recommend you maybe head on over to GameSurplus.com and see if Carmen and Elaine have it in stock, and try and pick up a copy there. They're just great people doing a great service for the community, bringing in lots of hard-to-find imports and continuing their mission of providing just fantastic customer support, and using their knowledge to bring over titles that people are going to find really compelling. I know, for example, Carmen and Elaine brought over Symphony, one of my favorite new Euro games, and I'd never even heard of it. And it came over, and I was lucky enough to grab one of the copies, and it's just a fantastic and thematic sort of a game. And so you find those kind of games over at GameSurplus.com. So give them a chance, and go over and head over and see if they have a copy perhaps of Through the Ages, a new story of civilization, and be on the lookout for the expansion when it comes. So for Brent Selmans and myself, I want to say thanks a lot for tuning in and listening, and everybody have a great night. All right, I'm going to hit end the broadcast. Boom.